Ikim Inspirasi Inforia Islami. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. And a very good evening to Ikim Radio listeners. You are with me, Annie Zahura Abdul Aziz, your host for today's episode of Open Forum. Thank you for tuning in to Ikim Radio, and also to those who are watching us through our Facebook page this evening. Welcome to the program. In today's episode, we have invited Dr. Ahmad Al-Muhammadi, the Assistant Professor at the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTAC, IIUM, and also he's the Deputy Director, Alumni Relations Division, IIUM. Thank you for coming to Open Forum, Dr. Ahmad.
Yes, thank you very much.
And today, I think we are going to talk about a very important issue. On the topic that we're going to talk about is on understanding religious extremism, a multi-dimensional analysis. But before we proceed further with our discussion, I would just briefly would like to introduce you to our fellow listeners. I think many people know you for your expertise, but some of our listeners will also like to recap, your background. So, Dr. Ahmad, as I've mentioned, is the Assistant Professor at ISTAC IIUM, and he's also an Associate Fellow at the International Center for Counter-Terrorism, ICCT, The Hague. And now he also involves in an ongoing project to develop Malaysia's National Action Plan for countering and preventing violent extremism, initiated by the Institute of Public Security of Malaysia under the Ministry of Home Affairs. So, since 2011, Dr. Ahmad has been working closely with the Special Branch Counter-Terrorism Division, Royal Malaysian Police, and also the Prison Department to implement the rehabilitation and de-radicalization programs for individuals detained under terrorism law in Malaysia. And you are also a member of de-radicalization panel and expert, a specialist appointed by the Ministry of Home Affairs for cases investigated under the Security Offences and Prevention of Terrorism Act, POTA. You also regularly appear in media and have been interviewed by many mainstream media, not just in the country but also internationally, Doctor?
Yeah.
Before we proceed further with our discussion, I believe that the topic on religious extremism, when we talk about how the role of religion in an individual's life. So maybe from your point of view, Doctor, what are the roles of religion as a human being? What are the roles of religion? What do you perceive that as a function of religion?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much, Annie, for the introduction and also inviting me to come here to Ikim Radio to share my thought on this topic. Dear listeners and ladies and gentlemen, I would say, number one, the topic of our discussion today, that is understanding religious extremism, a multidimensional analysis, is very, very important, very timely, and also very useful for us in Malaysia. Why? It is because of there is a confusion, of course, and there is a misunderstanding that some people always have, that when we talk about extremism, religious extremism, for example, they always associate it with radicalization or violent extremism and terrorism. So I think this discussion today is going to unravel the subject.
Mm-hmm.
So regarding the question that been asked just now, what is the role of religion in human life? This is a very, very central question of any civilization, of any religion. Mm-hmm. And it is also a very important question for any individual that exists today. What is the central role? What is the role of religion? First, we need religion because it is part of human nature to have religion. Mm-hmm. Meaning that human being is created to have the need for religion. Mm-hmm. A religion as something that provides a belief system and also certain activities, religious ritual, what we call it.
Mm-hmm.
It's provide a moral framework for our life.
Mm-hmm.
It also regulates societal activities. And of course, if we go to a higher level, it also regulates the interaction, relationship between states and relationship between civilization too. So religion is very central in human life. It's not only for a practical purpose, for example, to regulate human behavior or to regulate the state behavior or the civilizational relationship, but most importantly, to fulfill human needs. What does that mean? It means that a person without having certain belief system or without understanding of religion or precisely without God in their life, they would live in a situation just like a lost ship in the ocean, in a very vast ocean. They are sitting there sailing without any direction. They just follow the wind. And if the wind blows certain direction, they will go to that direction. And if there is a storm, they would go up and down without upside down. Now, with religion, it provides stability. It provides stability because human beings, they are very unstable emotionally. And sometimes they come across with certain challenge in their life, something that tests their faith, something that challenge something that they believe, an event, a tragedy that shake their belief, that shake their understanding, and therefore they need something. They need a certain power that actually bigger than themselves. So in our belief, for example, we have Allah as our God, and we believe Him as the God that is great. That is, we always say Allahu Akbar. And we always say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-aliyyil azim. There is no greater power than Him. So that kind of conviction give a certain assurance and also stability that actually, even though we are weak as human, but we have a greater power that will always exist in ourself, exist in our side, that help us to go through very tumultuous journey in our life. So, to recap what I have said earlier, in the Quran I mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He created the soul of man, of human being, and He asked Allah to be Rabbikum, the entire souls replied, Qalu bala. This actually means, this verse is very significant because it tells us that human being by nature is a primordial nature of fitrah, is a religious person. So somebody who denies the existence of religion, for example, or denies the religious life, they would live an empty life. They would live a life without direction, and they actually becoming God themselves because they say that I can decide. But unfortunately, human being in no way can be God. There always a greater power than himself. There would come a time that come across a reality that no, we are human being and there is a greater power than us. So I think most important point that we have to remember is that the role of religion in human life is to fulfill humans' fitrah, human needs, the primordial nature of human being, and also to regulate human behavior and relationship with others in society and in the state and also in civilization.
Okay, you have aptly explained the role of religion for an individual, and we're talking about religion and also the part of practicing of religion, understanding of religion. This is where sometimes there are ideas whereby in religiosity there is this moderate and extremism. You know, what are the guidance to this when we're talking about this aspect of religiosity, Doctor? Because as you have said, religion actually regulates human behavior. It fulfills our human nature, as human being. So what are the guidance to this in becoming people of religion?
Very interesting question. If you look at in the Quran, that's number one. And number two, if you look in society and in human history, there are always people who are extreme in religion.
Yeah.
And in the Quran, it specifically mentioned, La taghlu fi dinikum. Do not be excessive. Do not be extreme in your religion. And then if you read the certain surah, certain verses related to jihad, related to qital, for example, it's also mentioned that, jihad, refer to jihad in the battlefield, is necessary in certain situation. However, do not exceed the limit. So it's very clear, therefore, that there is tendency in human being whenever they become religious or they try to practice certain religious rituals, or even actually, because when we talk about extremism in religion, they are multidimensional. And I think that you have chosen a very right subject, right topic for our discussion this morning. People always associate, for example, extremism, religious extremism, with political extremism, for example, or with terrorism or violence. That actually, in fact, is not really the case, because religion could be in theological, it could be in ritual, could be in social life, and it could be in political dimension and some other dimension too. So there is tendency, go back to your question just now, there is tendency on human being to be excessive in their religion. So in Islam it's mentioned, La taghlu fi dinikum, there is no, don't be excessive in your religion, which means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminded us that yes, you can be practicing religion, you can practice your religion, you can practice the sunnah. And the Prophet also reminded us that you can, like, I'm a human being and the best Muslim is the person who, whenever they want to fast, right, they take sahur, they fast, and they break the fast. They got married, and then they sleep and they perform tahajjud. So there is a balance there, because one of the virtue in Islam is justice. So by putting things at the right place, because our body, for example, in the case of the tahajjud, in the case of staying up until wake up at night, in the middle of the night. So we want to wake up in the night, but we have to sleep first, meaning that we have to give justice to our body to sleep, and then to wake up later, and then to perform ibadah, to perform qiyamul layl. All right, so that is the balance between sleep and then qiyamul layl. So we give justice to our body, and then we also perform our duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is what is needed. But when a person try to be excessive, of course, when we talk about excessiveness in religion, we have a lot of factors. For example, the desire, internal desire, nafsu. Okay, that is why in Islam, jihadun nafs, okay, jihad against the self is to discipline ourselves, to follow strictly what religion prescribe. For example, it is very, very difficult. Some people they tend to be extreme in doing it, like they continuously doing it and focus on that activity, forgetting the world. Some people go into that direction, and some people also, they forget about religion and they go wholeheartedly pursuing the worldly pleasure. So that is the reason why Al-Qardawi, when he discussed on al-ghuluw, al-ghuluw fil Islam, he said that extremism in religion, it could be too strict, or extremism in one hand that is too strict and too loose on the other side. So what we are pursuing is actually al-wasatiyah that he mentioned, that is moderate. What is the meaning of moderate? Moderate means that stick or stay truly on Sirat al-Mustaqim. In Dua Iftitah, we always mention Hanifan Musliman. Hanifan Musliman meaning that whenever we walk, we just like we walk slowly on a very thin line, slowly, so that we do not deviate at all. So that is the meaning Hanifan. Hanifan means that you have to observe your feet so that it stays on the course and do not step outside that line. Hanifan. So the tendency to be either on the right side, on the right side, on the left side is always there. All right. So that is human tendency. So we as human being, we can come across with people whenever they're practicing religion, they try to do excessively.
Yeah.
And this excessiveness, so to speak, it is not only in religion, not only in theological, like in belief, because some people, for example, they have certain beliefs. They cannot accept anybody else. Anybody who do not follow strictly what they believe, they are considered as deviant. They're considered to be kafir, taghut, and they use a lot of other terms to portray that this person is actually out of the fold of Islam. All right, so that is in theological. That is also could be in the form of political, as what we can see that some people are very extreme in political ideology, political action, and social action in terms of interaction, and then rituals. They tend to take certain ritual practice excessively, and I would say cumulatively, whenever we have all of this extremism, it may threaten not only the integrity of religion, but also the integrity of the society and state. However, the common discourse that we have today, they always focus on the extremism and the threat to national security, or the religious extremism and its association with violent extremism or terrorism. To me, this is wrong. You know, let me give you one example. A lot of people ask me about Hizb ut-Tahrir, one of the group which is considered to be radical. What is your opinion about Hizb ut-Tahrir? Hizb ut-Tahrir, in one hand, you can find that their belief is quite radical in the sense that they reject democracy totally. Okay, but they do not involve in violence. So how can you explain group like Hizb ut-Tahrir? In one hand, they are not violent, but they have a radical ideology. So here you can see that certain group may theologically radical, but in other aspect, political dimension, social dimension, because their members, they live among us. They
participate in social
policy, social activities, and they interact with us, they live among us, and so on. Not radical in that sense. And in terms of ritual, they pray like everybody else. They're not like very strict. If you compare with a group like Jama'atul Tabligh, Jama'atul Tabligh is more strict in terms of the rituals, in ritual dimension. But I don't say that it is radical, but they are more strict and more observant then. So having this kind of understanding about multi-dimensional perspective of religious extremism or religious radicalism is very important, because if you have a wrong understanding or wrong analysis about religious extremism in society, you are going to come up with wrong analysis or wrong diagnosis. Yeah? If you talk about disease, you're going to come up with the wrong diagnosis. So imagine if you have a wrong diagnosis, you are going to come up with the wrong prescription, meaning that wrong medicine. So if you give a wrong medicine, you do not solve the problem, but you create problem. And I think this is exactly what happened in the West. Labeling, for example, Muslim, anybody, I mean any Muslim, as fundamentalist, as extremist, as potential terrorists, they are going to create more problem.
Yeah.
So I think in Malaysia, having multidimensional understanding of religious extremism is very important, because it gives us an opportunity to look at case by case basis, the group or individual, objectively, and to come up with accurate solution for that. So that's my response to your question, and I would say to summarize it, yes, we have to acknowledge that religious extremism in human life is there. It is out there. It's always happened because of human tendency to either go to the extreme right or extreme left, meaning that they excessively try to be very strict in terms of religious practice, theological, and so on. And they also could be, interpret religion in the way that they think to fit the modern contemporary world. And by doing so, it deviates from the original teaching of that religion.
It's interesting when you say that, you have to give the right diagnosis for you to give the right prescription to the issue of religious extremism. But what we see in the world today, when we're talking about religious extremism, especially the international viewpoint, we see that it has always been seen as something political, per se. And you also have said that you need to look at this case by case. So when we're talking about the multidimensional analysis, you've mentioned some aspects of it. For example, it's not just political; it can be theological, it can be any other forms as well. Would you like to maybe elaborate further on this?
Yes, I would maintain this very particular point. To understand religious extremism, we need to look at the group or the individual or the belief system or the discourse from multiple angles, so that we can get the right diagnosis, we can get the right understanding about the nature of the problem. So that is very important point. Now, the scholars of religion, especially those who study about religious extremism and also political Islam, they come up with 4 dimensions. Meaning, when we talk about multidimensional perspective, they come up with 4 dimensions of extremism. All right, meaning that based on to what extent that this group would be open and receptive to differences, and to what extent that, for example, they can accept difference of opinion, difference of view, or ability to interact with others comfortably, because some group, whenever they become so close, they do not want to interact with others. So this 4 dimension, number 1 is theological dimension.
Right.
So certain group, they have, for example, extreme form of theological understanding. They believe that this is the truth. Other people cannot accept, and anybody who do not accept it is considered to be, they can be eliminated, right? Because of that disagreement, the differences. And those people who moderate, they are more receptive to others. They able to like provide a space to listen, to discuss, to have a dialogue with others. That is theological. Second one is ritual dimension. Ritual dimension is referring to the religious activities that they have. A certain group, they have certain strict religious observation, religious observation for its members. So each members has to follow strictly the routine, and anybody who departs a little bit or who do not do certain thing, who do not observe certain thing. For example, keep the beard. All right, certain group they say that if you don't keep the beard, you're actually out of our league. So strictly following that kind of dimension or ritual, certain practices is so those people who are extreme, they would do that, and those people who are open to more latitude, more choice, they would that's fine as long as they believe in certain things. That's number 2. Number 3 is political. All right. So this is the point where I would say a lot of people tend to associate religious extremism with too much of political understanding, or they would say violent extremism, terrorism, and so on and so forth. Whereas in actuality, you can find the group who is very tolerant in one dimension, and in another part, they're very extreme. So if you have a one single view of the group, imagine that. You look at the group and say, this is extreme, this is not extreme. Where suddenly you realize that, well, this is not extreme. Let me give you a very extreme example. So people say Al-Qaeda is a terrorist organization. So if you mention about Al-Qaeda, people would say outright, okay, we have to reject Al-Qaeda because of their ideology, because of their practices. But for me, wait a minute. Let us look at Al-Qaeda objectively, one by one. Is there any certain aspect of moderation in Al-Qaeda or in ISIS? You will find one, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, let me give you an example. A lot of people say that ISIS is oppressing women. They put women at home, which is true to some extent. But hey, if you read ISIS document, you will find out that ISIS also encourage women to participate in social works, in political activities like involved in decision making, involved in even war. So how can you explain that? So you see, in one hand, you always have like, oh, ISIS will never allow that. But when you look at what is going on in reality, you would say, oh, okay, they also give the space. I was interviewed, by the foreign scholars who came to me and asked, do you find any misogynistic view or in the extremist discourse like ISIS? I said, certain issues, yes. Certain issues, no. So, and the person say, okay, that is something that new to me. What is it? Can you explain more? I say, okay, you try to look at ISIS document. They allow women to participate in war? Yes, they do. They allow women to work, to do certain things? Yes, they do. Meaning that there are certain aspects that they tolerate with others. And if you look at the issue of race among ISIS, do you think ISIS is racist? You may find difficulty to prove that ISIS is racist because the members of ISIS is multi-dimensional, multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-ethnic group. They accept any group. For them, these are the ummah. So if you have a very single, monolithic view of ISIS, you would say, no way that ISIS is tolerant. But no. As a researcher, I'm looking from the researcher perspective. I'm not defining ISIS, definitely. I'm not defining Al-Qaeda either. But as a researcher, it's supposed to give us an opportunity to be objective, to look at the issue objectively and try to come up with the accurate analysis of the problem. Right? So if we have that, then you would come up with a very, very accurate prescription for the problem.
Because sometimes, I mean, we question why do these organizations still attract people? I mean, the question is why are they
Yes.
still attractive? It is because of what you have said. They might be attractive on this particular
appeal, yes. So this kind of practice is humanistic, I would say. Is human, meaning that human being would be attracted to that. Meaning that, oh, you do not consider us as foreigners or as alien.
Yeah.
So we can be part of the larger group of the people who are working for the certain cause. I mean, wow, everybody loves that. Because in certain country, they would face discrimination. They would face racism, for example. So, well, it's not happened in ISIS. So that is political. However, we also need to look at another dimension, that is social aspect of it. To what extent that, so I mentioned just now about theological, and then second I mentioned about ritual, and then political.
Social.
Now we go to social. In social aspect, some group, they believe they would be very strict in terms of bonding, living among themselves, do not mix with other group, do not be receptive to other group. They always have certain views about others, right? So are they extreme? Are they moderate in that sense? I mean, I gave you the example of ISIS just now. From social dimension perspective, for example, ISIS is quite tolerant in that sense, you know. Even though, of course, theologically, ISIS is very, very extreme.
Yeah.
Okay? So that is from social aspect, from the bonding aspect. Now, I would like to add, because the scholars only stop at the 4 dimension. I think in Malaysia's context, we can add security dimension, because our country is multiracial society, multiracial country. We always concerned about the friction between religious communities.
Yeah.
So it is very important for us to add to what extent that this group would pose threat to national security, based on our constitution, based on the political framework that we have in this country, based on the principle of Rukun Negara, for example. This group that we have in our country working or have certain belief departs from the constitution that we have, being agreed upon by all people, by all religious community or ethnic community in this country. So if there is against the constitution, principle of Rukun Negara, any laws, then we can say that it is also could be extreme and a threat to the security dimension. And here I would like to mention, we acknowledge that in our country we have, in Malaysia, for example, we have like multi-religious group, religious community here in Malaysia. But one thing that I observe is that we do not have, for Islam, for example, we have Majlis Agama, religious department, we have JAKIM and so on. We have IKIM who take care of religious issues, religious matters, and give understanding to the people, which is very wonderful things. But if you observe other religious community, they do not have a single group which is recognized by the states to regulate and to govern themselves. And the absence of the authority, or I would say the governing bodies, which is recognized by the state, given the authority by the state to govern their community, this kind of absence might expose to the threat that is coming from outside. Those religious community, for example, the extremist religious denomination from the Christian group, from the Hindu group, from the Sikh group, for example, coming from outside, which is not part of us, coming from the outside, and then infiltrate into Malaysia, and they create something within the country. And those people who are living in Malaysia, like Christian community living in Malaysia, they got the blame. And the Hindu group, which they understand the constitution, they understand the norms, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable in Malaysia. they understand it. But because of the action of the group which is coming from outside to Malaysia, and they pretend to be, we are representing Hindu, and they collect donation, they create the church, and it create a kind of disharmony, misperception among other religious community, like Muslim to the Christian community. I think, therefore, one of the things that perhaps that we should explore, is to create a kind of religious authority among non-Muslim or minority group in this country, so that by having this kind of group, they can manage any infiltration from outside that may endangers the integrity of the theological aspect of it, the political aspect, ritual aspect of that religion. So that we do not, the state can work together with them to take care of this, meaning that, of course, the state do not have the opportunity to do everything. I think that by having a strategic partnership in that fashion, we can do something more effectively for that in order to manage religious extremism in Malaysia. So that's all my view on this.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ahmad, for what you have shared on the program. I think it is very important for us to understand the multi-dimensional perspective of this particular issue. As you have said also, that religious extremism is not just a problem for Muslims per se, but it's actually across all religion. There are groups which are extreme in their thinking, their religiosity, their practices, and so on, that can endanger the society, the security of the state. Okay, with that, I would like to thank you again, and thank you to my producer Hajah Mazlina Ismail, to our fellow listeners. See you again next week in another episode of Open Forum every Sunday at 5 p.m. With that, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.